Hello folks, I'm Alex, this is Alex Unabridged, and these are my thoughts on Grasshopper Jungle by Andrew Smith. So welcome back to the channel if that is the case. Yes, this is the first video in my science fiction for the somewhat hesitant series, where I'll be diving in to a whole host of different sorts of sci-fi books to try and immerse myself in the genre, figure out what I like, what I don't like, etc. Just explore this fantastic genre that I fell in love with a bit last year. So I'm easing myself in before we get to some of the heavier hitters within the sci-fi genre, and starting with some YA. And today it's the turn of Grasshopper Jungle by Andrew Smith. So in this we meet 16-year-old Austin and his best friend Robbie, and a whole host of other quite odd, wonderful characters in a small town in Iowa, Ealing, Iowa, which is a fictional town. And it charts the end of the world at the hands or mandibles of some giant 6-foot unstoppable praying mantis type bugs that Robbie and Austin inadvertently unleashed on the world. Austin is essentially writing a history of these events, and within that history he also interweaves his own thoughts, feelings, worries, etc. that go along with being a 16-year-old boy, certainly a 16-year-old boy questioning his sexuality as well, and also the story of his family legacy, if you like. He's of Polish descent, and he looks back at his forebears, essentially, and the different characters within his family that he kind of relates to. So yeah, this is a real interesting one to start with. This was a really good, fun read, is what I'll say. Is kind of as a quick verdict, yes, I enjoyed it. A really good, funny, but also heartfelt book. Bonkers. It is quite bizarre in places, and it's written in quite a bizarre way. But it has got some great writing in it and some great ideas, really clear themes. It's queer in a really lovely way. It has a few pacing issues. Length is my major criticism. It's a bit overly long, and I had a few issues with the style because of that, but generally it's a really good fun read. To give you a little bit more detail, character wise we follow mainly Austin and Robbie. Robbie is gay, Austin is questioning, very much questioning, but has a girlfriend, Shan. And it's those three really that are kind of our main friendship group. Those are the three characters that we follow most. They are extremely well formed characters. You get a real sense of who they are very quickly in the book. They're established very early on. And Austin particularly, because this is his kind of history. He's writing this, essentially. This is Austin's voice that we're hearing in the narrative. We get a really, really clear sense of who they are. They are complex, flawed characters with lots of stuff going on in their heads and lots of stuff to deal with in the outside world. But yeah, we spend most of our time with them. But there are plenty of additional characters that adds some real flavour to the sense of the place, the community, etc. And although they're not the primary focus, they're still very, very well drawn. They're all flawed, they're all a bit odd, there's a reasonable amount of diversity amongst them. They're just the kind of sort of random folks that you'd expect to find in kind of a small town environment. All of them are very full of personality, even if they're only in the book for like a couple of pages. Before they get eaten by giant bugs, basically. But within the space on the page that Smith has to deal with those characters, those small additional characters, he manages to pack in some really interesting, specific detail about them that really gives you a sense of who they are, where they fit into the community, and also kind of gives you a bigger sense of the world of the book as a whole. So yeah, really good character work. I felt very connected, particularly to the main characters, Robbie and Austin, and yeah, just a really interesting cast overall. The setting, as I say, the characters help with that, certainly the incidental characters, but similarly the writing and the detail, the description of the town, of the locations within here, make it feel very real. Even though it's a fictional place, it is obviously, you know, based on small town Iowa. It's a fictional small town, but I'm guessing it's based around general small towns in the Midwest. You get a real sense of what the town's like in terms of visually, the mapping of it, the geography of it, etc. But also what it's like for our characters. You know, these three teenagers living in a small, somewhat rundown, somewhat deprived town. As I say, the description of the locations are immersive, they're evocative. You know, Smith uses some really lovely language to describe some places. In fact, just even on the first couple of pages, there's a nice little paragraph here talking about the strip mall where the boys kind of hang out and skate. So the mall went up, built like a row of happy lower teeth, grinned for a while, and then about a year ago some of the shops there began shutting down, blackening out like cavities when people left our town for other, better places. I really like that. I really like that that description, you know, using the teeth. Just things like that. There's just a real warmth, I think, to the writing, and some really lovely kind of and sometimes quite random analogies used as well. That, you know, there's some really funny ones in there as well, which gives you a real sense of not only the place but also Austin as the character as well, the character writing it. The bugs, the 6 foot tall praying mantises that just want to do two things basically. You know, they're hungry and horny. That's all they are. They are suitably bizarre and gross. They're well realised. The kind of the action scenes, the horror scenes, if you like, are entertaining. They're fast paced. You know, that they, as I say, they're gross in a good, fun way. So yeah, overall, a really kind of immersive environment. I got a really good sense of the place and the creatures, etc., and the atmosphere of it as well. It's, you know, it's got a certain charm to it, despite the fact there's some kind of deprivation there, and also some quite sort of, you know, ugly elements to it in terms of like the sort of some of the characters that inhabit the town. Writing wise, it takes a little bit to get into, is what I'd say. It takes a little bit, not in terms of I felt myself struggling, but you just kind of have to, it's one of those where I had to kind of click my head into it a little bit, because it does jump around quite a lot. The prose flows quite well, it has a good rhythm to it, and there's a good amount of dialogue. The dialogue is, you know, is funny, it's well written. There's a lot of dialogue between Austin and Robbie, for instance. As I say, it's written as a history by Austin, and so it kind of, but also with, you know, as I say, with his thoughts and worries and concerns and all that kind of stuff as well. And so that's why it jumps around quite a bit. It jumps around a little bit in tone as well, and it kind of, it uses almost kind of it's not word association, but it kind of feels like that in terms of, you know, you go from one random thing to another, or like, you know, some sort of association bleeds into the next sentence, but it feels disconnected, but it's not. There's all of these different threads and connections that come through. So yeah, it seems random at times, but it's not. Is all I can say really without spoiling. I found it highly amusing, the style of it, although because of the length of the book, I do feel it's a bit overly long. as I say. So some of the repetition, there's a lot of repetition that comes in terms of a sort of a device, literary device. Repetition, this kind of word association, for want of a better term. Some of the humour, things like that, becomes a little bit overly repetitive, and it got a little tired towards the end of the book. As I say, it's written in Austen's voice, and he's a bright, inquisitive 16-year-old, but he's a 16-year-old boy nonetheless. He makes quite a lot of astute observations, as does Robbie, about the world, life, humanity, etc. And some of them even venture towards the profound. But for all of that, there's also a lot of stuff that you'd expect from a teenage boy in terms of his thoughts, where his mind is most of the time. You know, he's full of hormones. He's chock-a-block full of hormones. And there's a lot of talk about sex and horniness and things like that. There's quite a lot of immature humour, I guess you'd call it, which I find personally quite amusing. But I know it's not everyone's cup of tea. There is more than just that. There's some quite dry humour, and there's some quite surreal humour, and there's a really good mix, I feel. It's not just kind of toilet humour and sex jokes, but there is a lot of that in there. As I say, that will, you know, your mileage will vary based on whether you find that funny or not. But generally, I think the devices that are used, the literary devices that are used in terms of repetition, word association, the histories, you know, the kind of the logging of this history, etc., along with the dialogue and the way it's, you know, the action is described as well, things like that. It works really well. I really liked the style of this. Plot-wise, as I say, my major criticism is that I think this is overly long. I think you could cut down quite a bit of this in terms of plot, and it just in terms of, say, some of the humour, the dialogue, things like that, I think could probably be pulled back a little bit. So because it's overly long, it does suffer with some pacing issues for me. Not in terms of ups and downs throughout it, but it just, you know, it was great on the pacing until maybe just 3/4 of the way through it, and then it started to kind of drop for me in terms of my engagement, because it just felt like it was going on a bit too much. So as I say, as much as I enjoyed the writing in the most part, that's when the things like the repetition and sex jokes and all that kind of stuff started to be less entertaining and felt more just kind of, they started to you know, threaten to overstay their welcome. Fortunately, they never quite did, to the point of ruining anything for me, but it started to get tired, I think, for me. My engagement started to slide a little bit. It was perhaps a little overwritten in parts. It was perhaps a little overly complex in terms of its kind of beats, the number of different like plot points, things like that, story beats. But there weren't any major holes or anything like that, or inconsistencies. So, you know, that's a good thing. That I'm more likely to forgive it a bit of overwriting than I am kind of, you know, sort of lack of thought and lack of attention to detail when it comes to things like plot holes, stuff like that. The overall, I'd say the plot was good. I certainly didn't know where it was going to end up by the end of it, in a good way, in that it kept me guessing right up until the final outcome. Yeah, I was never quite sure what the resolution was going to be on this. And that was good. I liked that. You know, as I say, it was pretty bonkers, so it was hard to kind of pin down where this might end up. In terms of its kind of ideas, concepts, themes, things like that, it's got a lot to say, actually, this, I think, in terms of themes. And it does it just in a really kind of accessible way. It doesn't feel like it's trying to ram anything at you. It's all well woven in as part of these complex kind of story threads. It's not saying anything like necessarily new, but it is saying it in a very approachable, very accessible way, and it is approaching it, I think, in a different way. It feels different enough. It feels like quite a unique story. Yeah, I think the themes that it addresses are important ones as well. Certainly it's a coming of age story first and foremost. You know, it is about Austin and his friends dealing with, you know, the ups and downs of being a teenager in terms of sexuality, sex, love, you know, ego, friendship, relationships, how all that works together, how you interact with the world, finding your place in the world. But it's also starts to bring in, you know, it's also talking about other, I would say, slightly more kind of philosophical things in terms of, you know, stuff like how everything is connected. There's kind of a phrase used quite a bit in terms of that pertains to sort of all roads leading to this point. That despite you've got these seemingly random kind of bits of history from all over the place, Austin's family history, Polish family history, what's going on with the giant bugs, you know, kind of Robbie's history, Shan's history and family and stuff like that, and, you know, random characters from elsewhere. Everything kind of eventually seems to weave its way together, and there's random connections made, threads, you know, intertwine, which you wouldn't necessarily expect. And it, you know, all roads lead to this point for Austin. And I thought that was expressed and handled really well and in a really entertaining way. And also I think the idea that as humans we can't seem to help repeating old mistakes but in new ways a lot of the time. And, you know, kind of how history is meant to be a record of the things that we do so we can improve on what we do, but actually we just keep doing things over and over and over again. In fact, the very first paragraph in the book speaks to that, which I will read. I read somewhere that human beings are genetically predisposed to record history. We believe it will prevent us from doing stupid things in the future. But even though we dutifully archived elaborate records of everything we've ever done, we also managed to keep on doing dumber and dumber shit. This is my history. There are things in here. Babies with two heads, insects as big as refrigerators, God, the devil, limbless warriors, rocket ships, sex, diving bells, theft, wars, monsters, internal combustion engines, love, cigarettes, joy, bomb shelters, pizza and cruelty. Just like it's always been. So yeah, that idea of history repeating itself is woven throughout this, again with Austin's like seemingly random bits of history coming in, all kind of merging together, and, you know, kind of eventually all making sense. So yeah, the ideas in this I really enjoyed. I think that was possibly one of my favourite elements of it, I think. So my enjoyment of it is, you know, it was high. I really enjoyed the majority of it, but it did start to grate a little by the end of it. Not as I say, not enough to ruin my enjoyment of it, but you know, it is definitely something to note that I think had it been slightly shorter and that kind of, as I say, some of the content that always had the potential to kind of be get a little bit annoying if it went on too long. You know, it just started to creep in that irritation. But it was still really good fun, and I would read it again for sure. Absolutely, I think there's a lot that I probably missed in terms of connections and things like that in it, and repetitions, and certainly in terms of the style. I'd like to go back and look at it in terms of how it all connects up. So it's definitely an interesting one. I think it is, you know, it's a strange mix of genre. This, it's, you know, it's coming of age, science fiction, horror, action stuff, and I think, to be honest, for the intended audience, who I assume are teenage boys, I think this has got some really good stuff in it, really good stuff in it, and the way that some of the complex ideas are discussed and approached. I think, you know, whilst being this kind of science fiction adventure stuff, teenage science fiction adventure stuff with the sort of humour that it is, I think that could be a really engaging and quite thought-provoking read for some youngsters. So in that respect, I think, you know, it's got a hell of a lot going for it, this one. My score for this then, I am on a new rating system now, so we've moved to an out of 10 system. I will pop up on the side next to me here the scores for each individual kind of element that I've considered, and those are added up and divided by 6, and when we do that we get an overall score of 8 out of 10 for this one. So it's great, you know, 8 out of 10, 8 is great. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this, particularly to teenage boys, who might possibly be questioning their sexuality. But yeah, it's a really good fun read with some really interesting things to say about it. So yeah, an 8 out of 10. If you're interested and you prefer star ratings, I will be putting this on my story graph as a 4-star. That's what it kind of converts to for the sake of Goodreads and story graph and stuff like that. So yes, so I will leave that there for today. A big success for my first science fiction for the somewhat hesitant read. Next week I will be reading The Girl Who Broke the Sea by A. Connors, so that's my other YA one for January. So tune in next Friday for my thoughts on that one. So yes, that'll do from me today. Thank you very much for watching, folks. As always, do leave your thoughts in the comments down below. If you've read this, I'd like to know what you thought, or if I've, you know, convinced you to pick it up or not today, then do let me know that as well. But if you enjoyed this video, please do consider giving me a like and subscribing for more bookish ramblings and all that good stuff coming soon. But from me, for now, that's ta-ra.